Alrighty. Thank you, Terry, for that lovely introduction and welcome. I'm so excited to be up here on stage with these incredible individuals, and I'm really excited to hear about what you have to tell us. So I think let's just dive right in. The one thing I think we're all dying to know about AI is, in spite of it being around for almost 50 years now, why isn't it more ubiquitous in healthcare? Why hasn't it been integrated in a better way? Wendy, why don't you kick things off?
Yeah, thanks. I think this is the key question, because a lot of people, of course, think AI is new and are very excited about all the ways it can be implemented and don't learn from history. IBM Watson is an example of that, I think, of coming in and thinking, oh, I have this new thing, and not realizing the barriers. And the barriers, there are so many barriers, and I think some of the main ones are really that developers are creating tools that are little tools. They don't think about how it fits into the ecosystem, and does it add value to the clinician's workflow? How does it fit into the workflow? How will the clinicians using it understand the output? How will they interpret it? How will they understand where it came from and if it's validated? And how do they apply it? It's really just part of this larger ecosystem, and it's not necessarily that the developers, and I'm one of those developers that developed NLP algorithms in the past for clinical notes. It's not that they're not paying attention to it, all that's part of it. It's very hard to access the healthcare system and be able to really figure out how to get it to integrate.
John, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this. I used to say it was that not enough data was digital, and in fact it's important to remember that for large chunks of the healthcare system in Australia at least, a lot of data is not digital, the sort of data you'd want to feed into these AR models. And then the next bit is about what Wendy's mentioning, is that a lot of these solutions aren't built thinking about how they might integrate with our solutions, both on a technical level, how do you plug the data in so it feeds and responds, but also at a user interface level, how does it get presented to the user in their normal workflow? And a lot of our workflows are not digital still, even though the data might be stored somewhere. But then I think there's another facet as well, and it's becoming more interesting, I think, with Gen AI, because unlike most other AI solutions, which are sort of, they're kept in a dark hole amongst the geeks and the nerds unless we can plug them into our frontline systems. Gen AI is in your face. Everybody can access it on their phone, their iPad, their computer. Even with the barriers of firewalls and everything, people still get access to it, right? And it's very usable. It's conversational. It's the way we interact with the rest of the world. So this final element, I think, is absolutely critical, and it's safety and quality. So in healthcare, unlike a lot of other industries, that is our first and foremost priority: safety and quality and accessibility of healthcare. And when we're building the complicated systems of the past, you couldn't get past that. Whereas now we've got an issue because we've turned on AI, given it to people, but haven't really stopped to think about the safety and quality and accessibility implications. So it's really turning everything on its head, the latest Gen AI stuff.
And so, Brian, you're at Salesforce. Can you tell us a little bit about how we might improve consumer trust? So segueing off what you said about consumer privacy and data privacy, how can we make the best use of AI whilst ensuring that consumers do feel that their data is protected?
Yeah, there's so much value in what John and Wendy have just shared. When it comes to trust, that's a major issue that Salesforce sees as well in the acceptance of Gen AI. So we've done some research with Boston Consulting Group recently, interviewing about 40,000 consumers of government services, for example, worldwide. About 10% of those respondents came from Australia and New Zealand. It's really interesting. I was busy celebrating digital health last night quite late, so I wrote down some notes so I could remember this morning exactly what those stats are. But it's interesting when we have a look at that acceptance factor, approximately 20% believe that the benefits outweigh the risks of Gen AI, specifically, not pre-Gen AI, so it was focused around Gen AI. And about 30% said the risk was probably about equal with the benefits. About a third said the risks outweigh the benefits, and then 15% said, I don't know, don't care. So then you dive a bit deeper and you have a look at those cohorts of people who responded in that way. And respondents with the most knowledge of AI, who perhaps use it on a daily basis or use it quite regularly, either as a consumer or in the course of their work, were 4 times more likely to say that the benefits outweigh the risks compared to respondents with just a basic knowledge of AI. And then those who had the most knowledge of AI were 15 times more likely than the cohort who had no knowledge of AI to accept that the benefits outweighed the risks. So there was a bit of a correlation there that I think we're starting to believe that trust will actually improve. And the topic today was moonshot, right? How do we get to that moonshot idea of Gen AI? Well, part of that is understanding that greater exposure, greater education, greater awareness will only build greater layers of trust. We've seen that in a number of other areas of life, right? And I think here it highlights the need then for our governments to also invest in building AI literacy and also in knowledge and awareness and education about the use of Gen AI and how broadly it's already being used. And I think greater exposure will build greater trust. And that's one of those existing barriers to wider acceptance.
John?
Yeah, that's some really interesting stats, Brian, which I hadn't heard of before. And it's interesting to me because I feel like now am I an exception, or is there something else at play here? Because I feel like I'm fairly aware of AI. I spent 2 years with one of the largest AI startups in Australia. I spent a lot of time
I think I would put you in the first category, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about AI a lot. And yet I would say I've actually got cognitive dissonance. I can totally see how amazing, incredible the new, especially the generative AI, and for those in the audience who don't know what we mean by Gen AI, we're talking about ChatGPT, large language models, the predictive models that create images, video, and text that you see online pretty readily. But I'm really worried about the consequences of these tools. I think they are untested. They are being used in ways that interfere directly with patient care. We're using them to write summaries of patient notes, for God's sakes. You cannot get more invasive into the care pathway. And we've got nothing really evidentiary-wise to say that they can't cause tremendous harm. Now, I'm an optimist, and I'm saying that. And I'm wondering whether it's because it's not so much the AI I'm worried about. I'm worried about the humans. It's worrying about the humans using AI. And there was a couple of, I don't want to hog the conversation, but there are a couple of recent articles, one from JAMA Network and one from Lancet Digital Health. And it was really fascinating looking at one of the graphs, which showed, like I read the text the AI generated and thought, oh my God, I'd vomit if I got that. And I read what the clinicians wrote and I thought, that's much clearer. I know what they're going to do, makes sense. Now, I'm a clinician. I'm not a typical patient. So maybe it's just me. I'm a bit of a weirdo. But what was really interesting, when they looked at all the responses, the manually generated responses to patient messages had much more action statements and had urgent care recommendations were really much higher when manually generated by a clinician. When the large language model generated the response, almost no action statements, almost no suggestions for urgent care. But what was most interesting was that when clinicians then got presented those drafts and modified them, the increment in action statements and urgent care statements was tiny compared to the percentage that would have said something if they hadn't had the model. So the model is changing the way the clinicians are thinking, it's changing their behaviour. Now, that might be fantastic. Maybe we're being overreactive and calling too many people in, and we're going to save the health system billions of dollars through less callbacks. But maybe not. Maybe we should be having those action statements. And until we research it, we don't know. So I think the responsibility on healthcare clinicians and the healthcare systems is to research this stuff at pace to work out whether it's safe or not. Because if it's safe, it's bloody brilliant and we should be using it everywhere. But if it's not safe, we've got to work out how to make it safe.
The fear factor is significant, isn't it, John? Okay, I'm going to ask my fellow panelists this question. What do you reckon the consumer research suggests about the top 3 fears of Gen AI? Any guesses?
I've
Feel
learned
free.
the hard
No
way
wrong
never to
answers.
guess what the population thinks.
Yeah.
Probably the robots are going to take over the world a la Terminator.
Not bad, yeah. Wendy, any thoughts?
I can't think.
I'll give it to you. It's number 1, potential job loss, economic impact. Number 2, so Robert's taking over the world. Accuracy of results, number 2. You highlighted that as well, John, especially in healthcare. And moral and ethical considerations unresolved. So again, human in the loop. I think you're spot on. So those 3 kind of top fears are still significant barriers that we need to address, need to overcome, and then I think there'll be wider acceptance as well. This will be also something that we will have to iterate and reiterate in our use as we learn along the way. I think the guidelines, the governance that we have will have to evolve as well beyond what we currently have in order to develop Gen AI and implement it in the eye line of our clinical users in a way in which it's safe, in a different way in which we're also doing now in terms of our clinical governance too. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, and I like that we are talking about the individual here, because we often hear about the application of AI in the clinical practice and more broadly in large organizations, but if we bring it back to who it impacts, it's really individuals. And I think with the rise of telehealth care in the home, wearables, people are starting to take charge of their own health. We've got some incredible Australian startups like Saha AI who are making passive data accessible at scale. And I'd like to know from each of you, how do you think this will be integrated into clinical practice, and what is the role of AI in helping us to do that?
If you think about as a patient and you are collecting information about yourself, whether it's tracking your symptoms on a piece of paper or using a smart device to capture physiological signs, and you go into your GP, that GP in general is not going to want to look at any of your data.
Exactly.
And many good reasons. I mean, first, it's overwhelming. And maybe you dump out some spreadsheet or, and they have 8 minutes or 15 minutes to see you. And they don't necessarily trust where it came from. Some of that is valid and some of that is curmudgeon-ness. So I think there's just so much we don't know about how to integrate that data into more shared decision-making and participatory health with the patient.
Yeah, and I think that once we start to learn how research fits into this and how to leverage research to allow us to integrate things more seamlessly, I think that we're going to see this data becoming a lot more useful. And actually, I wanted to ask you about that. What do you think the role of research is?
Well, as a researcher.
Yes, exactly.
No, well, I think that, as everyone said here, there's just so much we don't know. And I want to pick up on a point that John made about the summarization. And there's lots of things that we don't know about what's missing or how it's changing, and we need to learn that. But we don't know right now about how the summarizations do the same, the same questions about summarizations made by the registrars or the humans that are doing it. And so we don't have necessarily good baselines. So I think because we don't know how to do it best, because we don't know the safety and the efficacy, because we know there's need for evidence in medicine to be safe and have good quality, then we need to be experimenting. But we also know that the gold standard clinical trial is probably not the right mechanism. It's going to be for some things, but in general, this is a fast-moving space. We need to have more of a learning health system approach where it's agile and you're asking specific questions and learning them quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, look, I 100% agree, Wendy. Our readiness for this work is zero. Like, we don't have the panels of how do humans behave? How many times do I make a mistake when I listen to an hour-long conversation with a patient and write a summary of it? Because, a lot of the marketing says, well, you don't know how many mistakes humans make. They're absolutely right. But I'd like to find that out before I choose to use these solutions. But I think, the AI has a tremendous advantage over humans. Like, you look at the models built today, they're built on more information that I could read if I spent 10 hours a day reading for 100 lifetimes. Like, how do you compete with that? And I think we have to approach it in our responses. We need to create panels of tests that are geared to testing the quality of these solutions against real world. We have to have recordings of conversations with patients, transcriptions. We have to have ones that have been vetted by, panels of experts as to quality, and we have to come up with measures of measuring quality of transcription. And we don't have any of that. We're just assuming it's all pretty much okay because to date, standard of care is just that. We measure everything against usual standard of care, and this is anything but usual, and we've got nothing to measure it against. So it really is a fascinating conundrum, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that the classic clinical trial process, I often shoot arrows at companies who don't want to take responsibility for generative AI solutions, and none of them do. It's all, use this, you're checking the work, it's all up to you if it's wrong. Well, I just think that's like a drug company saying, look, we don't know whether this drug works or not, but use it, she'll be right, and if it doesn't work, it's your fault. So, but there's a problem with that because it takes 25 years to bring a drug to market, or 12 years, or whatever it is. And an AI model will change next week, next month. There'll be 3 more next few days. So how do you come up with a way of testing them that can keep up with that pace of change?
Yeah, I agree. So I know we can talk about this all day, but we're running out of time. Last question I'd like to throw to each of you. When AI is where it's at in 50 years, when models are better than where they are today, what do you think are the issues we will face, and what can we do now to influence that future?
Who wants to go first?
You guys go first. That's all right.
I feel like I've been hogging, but look, I think we're going to be in a better place. I think we're going to be in a better place because the models are going to be better, but more importantly than that, at the moment, there's no diversity. We have maybe 5 models, of which 3 are used regularly. It's like having 3 humans who provide all the answers to everything. And I just don't think that's safe, just like I don't think any lack of cognitive diversity is safe. When we've all got an AI in our pocket that's tuned to us, that we train, that we experience, and everybody has that, and there's an issue of equity there, can everybody have one of these? I think we're going to be in a better place than we are now, simply because there's more diversity.
I think that right now, hospitals, primary care, they think of researchers and universities as this outside group that they bring in every now and again to evaluate something. And in 50 years, it really has to be this, industry, the healthcare organizations, clinicians, government, and researchers have to be like all part of the same team. And the research is not considered this separate thing. It's just part of the fabric of what's going on as you're collecting data, learning from it, monitoring it, and getting that cycle.
For me, there's been a lot of focus in conversation on the front-end use of Gen AI. I think one of the less spoken about dramatic shifts that are going on at the moment that not many people know about is use of Gen AI potentially in developing and implementing the technical solutions. So where historically we've had human hands on keyboard, I think in future, and right now we're seeing costs of some of implementation projects anywhere between hundreds of millions to billions potentially on project rollouts. There is a dramatic potential here to increase the sustainability of healthcare by using Gen AI to develop and implement those solutions at the clinical coalface on our projects. So that I think is not really well known, it's not spoken about much, but it's going to be happening behind the scenes, and that's going to be a major shift in our health tech industry.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think we're all looking forward to the day when AI is integrated and sitting in our pocket on our phone or on some other new device that comes out. Brian, Wendy, and John, thank you very much for your time and for your insights.